What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. In this video, I want to talk to you about whether or not you should bug out during a nuclear war. So that's what I'm going to cover in this video. So there's a couple of things you need to consider when we're talking about nuclear war. You always need to consider, where is the nearest target? How close are you to that target? What type of target is it? And what are the prevailing winds? Okay, that's critical to know for any nuclear war survival situation. So that's where we always start when we're talking about nuclear war. So there's a list of all the targets on my website, NYPrepper.com. There's a link in the description below this video, and I'm continuously updating that list of targets. Sometimes I do some reading and I find out that there's a target that I didn't think about. So I'll always add new targets if I find something, but the list that I have is pretty much complete. So check that list out. So you need to know how close you are to any nuclear war targets, and you also need to know what type of target it is. Okay, are we talking about a counter value target? Are we talking about a counter force target? Are we talking about a bunker or a city? What is the target? Because that's going to determine what type of warhead our enemy uses. Okay, so generally speaking, if there's a hardened target like a bunker or a silo, they're going to use surface bursted warheads. And the reason why is they want to concentrate the explosive power right on top of that silo or that hardened target. Okay, so if you live near a missile silo, if you live near a major military installation, especially a military installation that is part of our nuclear arsenal or critical to the functioning of our nuclear arsenal, they're going to use surface bursted warheads. Okay, so in that situation, there's going to be a massive amount of fallout. If we're talking about a counter value target, which would be like big cities across the United States, they would most likely use airbursts because they're not really interested in concentrating the explosive power, because they're not trying to destroy a very hard object. What they're trying to do is maximize the blast radius, because a city is a large target. You know, most cities are several miles across. So if they were to use a surface burst, the blast wave is not going to spread out as far, because the blast wave is going to be partially absorbed by the ground. And so the blast wave is going to not spread out as far as if it's airbursted. With an airburst, the explosive power is not going to be as concentrated because it's detonated in the air. So the damage to infrastructure is not going to be as severe as with a surface burst, but the blast radius is going to be larger. Okay, so the blast radius is going to extend a few miles out further than with a surface burst. And with an air burst, you're not going to get fallout. Okay, so those are two things you need to know, is surface burst versus air burst, because that has a lot to do with the fallout and also the blast radius. Okay, the next thing is your winds. Okay, you should always know what the prevailing winds are in any area that you frequent, whether it's a place that you live, whether it's a place that you work, it's a place that you travel to frequently. You should know the prevailing winds depending on the season, and you should also know how weather affects those prevailing winds. So just to give you an example, here in Pennsylvania or the Northeast or Midwest, in the wintertime, the prevailing winds are usually out of the northwest. Okay, in the summertime, the prevailing winds are usually out of the southeast or the southwest. Now, if a cold front comes through like a line of thunderstorms in the summertime here, the wind will come from the northwest temporarily as that front comes through, okay? So you need to know the prevailing winds based on the season, and you need to know how the weather affects the prevailing winds, okay? So you need to do some research. You need to figure that out for yourself, okay? And so that's going to tell us whether bugging out is going to be too risky or not, okay? You need to know how close you are to this target, and there's a lot of risks involved with bugging out in general, but if we're talking about bugging out during a nuclear war, some of the main risks are that you could get caught outside with no fallout shelter, and in that situation you're going to be exposed to lethal radiation in just a matter of an hour or even less, depending on how close you are to the detonation point. Generally speaking, the closer to the detonation point, the stronger the fallout is going to be. Okay, so it really depends on which fallout contour you're in. Okay, so that's the biggest risk, is that you try to bug out and you could get stranded as the fallout is coming down. Okay, and you need to have a good plan. All right, if you're going to be bugging out during a nuclear war, it's even more essential to have a good plan, okay? Where are you going to bug out to? All right, you want to bug out to a place that's going to protect you from radiation, okay? And so that's something you got to really plan out, because protecting yourself from radiation is not the same as protecting yourself from marauders. All right, you need to have an underground structure preferably, and it has to be pretty dense, okay? And another thing you want to think about is, when would you bug out, okay? That's critical. So realistically speaking, if you get an alert on your phone that there's missiles inbound, okay, everybody in the country would get an emergency alert on their cell phones, on TVs, everywhere. You would have emergency alerts and air raid sirens going off. And generally speaking, you're going to have 15 to 30 minutes to take shelter before those warheads detonate, okay? So you're not going to be able to get too far in 15 to 30 minutes, okay? Whether it's with a car, whether it's with a bicycle, whether it's on foot, okay? You might get a couple of miles, all right? So it's hard for me to kind of talk about that in a video, because there's a lot of gray area there. So like, you know, if you're already on the highway and you're driving home, and let's say you're on your way home from work, you work in a big city, let's say like New York City or something, and you're already, you know, halfway out of the city, and while you're on the highway, you get an alert on your phone that, you know, there's missiles inbound, and we think one of the targets is going to be New York City, and you have 30 minutes before the warheads detonate. If you're already on the highway and you're already like halfway out the city, my recommendation would be to just keep going, all right? Push that pedal down, you know, crank that acceleration, and get as far away from the target as possible in that situation, okay? Because you're already on the open road. You're not going to have a lot of obstacles in your way. So in that situation, it makes sense to try to bug out. But, you know, if you're in your apartment building in downtown New York City and you're watching TV and all of a sudden you get an alert, there's no point in trying to bug out, because you're not going to be able to, okay? You're not going to be able to get out of the city in 15 or 30 minutes. It's just not going to happen, because everybody else is going to get that alert and everybody's going to try to get out at the same time, okay? So it's not going to happen. So in that situation, you need to find a shelter near you that you can get to within a few minutes to survive that blast, okay? And that's if you're in the blast radius, okay? So we're talking about if you're in the blast radius, if you're close to the target and you think you're going to be near the blast, okay? These are things you have to consider. Is it realistic for you to be able to leave from your area in 15 to 30 minutes. In most cases, it's not. Unless you live in the countryside, then you can get onto a country road. There's no traffic. There's no obstacles in your way. You have open country roads. You can slam on the gas and get away, all right? But any city, any suburb, it's not realistic to try to get away from the detonation point within 15 to 30 minutes. You may get a couple of miles away, but the problem is, okay, let's say you get 5 miles out from the city, you're still within the blast radius of most modern nuclear weapons. Where are you going to shelter? Because you're not going to know if you're just panicking and you just get in your car and you start driving, where are you going to take shelter? Of course, you could pull over on the side of the road and jump into a ditch. That's a possibility, but then you're going to be potentially exposed to lethal dose of radiation from the initial pulse of radiation. So, in my personal opinion, do not bug out. If you're within the blast radius, if you're next to a target, do not bug out if you're in a big city, okay? Your best bet is going to be to find some kind of underground structure, okay? Most cities have subway tunnels and metro stations, and that's where you're going to want to go. That's going to be the safest place to be if you live, let's say, in downtown New York City or whatever, some other big city. You want to get into a subway tunnel or metro station. That's going to be the safest place to be, and you most likely would survive the detonation of the nuclear weapons because you're going to be deep underground and you're going to be safe, okay? And you'll also be safe from the fallout, all right? But if you're within the blast radius and you're already like halfway out the city, like I said, in that situation, it makes sense to try to, slam on the gas and get out of there, okay? Now, if you're in the countryside and you're within the blast radius, then sure, you can bug out, all right? You just need to have a good plan if you're going to do that, okay? Regardless of whether you're going to find a shelter near you or you're going to try to bug out to get away from the blast, you need to have a good shelter because it doesn't matter if you get 5 or 10 miles away from the blast, because remember, you're only going to have 15 to 30 minutes, okay? 15 to 30 minutes is not a lot of time. And by the time you get into your car, start your car, drive away, it's not going to be like you're already on the highway and you're already going 70, 80 miles an hour. It's going to take you time to, get into your car, figure out where to go. You may have to make some turns. Not every road is going to lead you perfectly straight away from the city, away from the target. The roads are not just like straight lines away from a city. There's usually zigzags and curves and turns. So you may be on the road for 30 minutes, but you may only cover 1 mile, okay? And if we're talking about a big city, lots of people panicking, there's going to be a lot of people on the roads trying to get out, and you're not going to go anywhere. So best bet, if you're in a big city or, a populated area and your city is a target or there's a target near your city, your best bet is to bug in, basically, and find some kind of underground structure, okay? A train station underground, a subway tunnel, a deep basement. A lot of apartment buildings in big cities and high-rise buildings like office buildings, they have very deep basements that are very strong. And those basements and the foundation has to be very strong because they have to support the weight of that entire building. So, that's a decent spot, but it's better to get to a subway tunnel or a train station because what's going to happen is all the buildings are going to collapse most likely, okay? Not entirely, but it depends on, is it a surface burst? Is it an air burst? If they air burst like over New York City, you're going to have a lot of partially collapsed buildings, okay? They may not completely collapse but they may be partially collapsed. So if you're in the basement of a high rise or the basement of an apartment, you may get buried. You may not be able to get out, you know. So that's why a subway tunnel is the best, because at least with a subway tunnel, you can walk out from that city and from that rubble. You can get away, okay? So that's the best case scenario. You have to do the research for yourself and figure out, you know, what are suitable blast shelters, okay? So that's if you're near a target and if you're in a city, okay, that's what you want to do, is you basically want to bug in unless you're already like halfway out, okay? Now, if you're in a rural area, like let's say, you know, you live in North Dakota, right? And you have a nuclear silo, nuclear missile silo, a Minuteman III silo, you know, 5 miles down the road from you. In that situation, they're going to use surface bursts on that silo, all right? They're going to commit at least one, most likely 2 warheads per silo to ensure destruction. Okay, so they're going to commit 2 warheads that are surface bursted on each of those silos. So in that situation in North Dakota, there's a lot of open roads. There's not a lot of people. You have straight roads that go for miles and in straight lines for, you know, 100 miles. In that situation, get in your car, slam on the gas, and drive away. In that situation, yes, okay? In that situation, it makes sense, all right? But in a city, no. Because in a city, you're not going to get out. It's not realistic, and you're going to get caught outside, and the blast wave is going to come, and you're not going to make it. So if we're talking about bugging out during a nuclear war, we're talking about 2 chances to bug out, okay? One is you bug out before the warheads detonate. And the other one is that you shelter in place while the blast wave comes through, and then after the blast wave, you bug out before the fallout lands, okay? So those are the 2 times that you would bug out during a nuclear war, either before the warheads land, or you ride out the detonation, you find a good blast shelter, you know, like a subway station, a subway tunnel. You shelter in place there, and then after the blast passes, okay, after the explosion, after the blast wave, then you bug out before the fallout lands, okay? So realistically, if you're in a big city, even after the blast wave passes, it's going to be very difficult to bug out, okay? And you're going to be exposed to a massive amount of radiation, because if they use a surface burst on a city, the radiation is going to be right there where the city is, okay? If they use an airburst, there won't be any fallout, so that's a good thing. But you got to think of all the rubble and all the buildings on fire, you know, everything is going to be set on fire because the temperature is going to be thousands and thousands of degrees, okay? Everything, literally steel is going to melt. So realistically, bugging out from a city during a nuclear war, in my opinion, is not possible. And that's why I always tell people, move out of a city, at least get to the suburbs, okay? Because at least in the suburbs, you're usually outside of the blast radius. And if you're within the blast radius still, you're going to be away from the severe damage zone, or even the moderate damage zone, where you're going to have 50% or more buildings destroyed. You want to be outside of the severe damage zone, and preferably outside of the moderate damage zone, okay? So realistically, if you live in a city, you're not going to be able to bug out during a nuclear war. Even if you go down into a tunnel and the explosion occurs, by the time the explosion passes, everything is going to be in rubble, everything's going to be burning. It's going to be very difficult to bug out unless you have some kind of subterranean way of getting out, like with the subway tunnels, okay? So that's why I recommend subways, because like New York City, for instance, all the subways are connected, and you have like Metro North, which goes outside of New York City to the north. So you could literally, follow the subways, get a subway map, keep it in your bug out bag, and make sure you have some good light sources, multiple batteries and candles, because it's going to be pitch black in those subway tunnels. There's not going to be any emergency lighting, and there's no natural light in subway tunnels, so you're literally not going to be able to see your hand in front of your face, okay? So you need multiple light sources, and you're going to want to, let's say, get to like Metro North if it's New York City, and you're going to want to walk north out of the city, okay? So that's what I think about bugging out during a nuclear war if you live in a city. Again, rural areas, it's much easier to bug out either before the warheads land or even after the warheads land. It's much easier to bug out, okay? Now, let's use the example of North Dakota, okay? North Dakota would be a surface burst. So what that means is that there's going to be a lot of fallout. Believe it or not, like I said, in New York City, if we use that example, there's not going to be a lot of fallout because most likely they would use air bursts. So the fallout would be either non-existent or very minimal, okay? Because the fireball is not going to come into contact with the ground or any objects. It's going to be detonated, above the city in the air. So there's nothing to create fallout with, okay? But like in the North Dakota example, they're going to detonate 2 warheads right on top of a silo. That's going to generate a lot of fallout, okay? And if you're just a few miles away from that silo, the fallout is going to be landing almost immediately, okay, because you're so close, all right? The closer you are to your target, the faster the fallout is going to land, all right? So if you're 50 miles away, it may take 4 hours, maybe 6 hours before the fallout starts to land. If you're 100 miles or 200-300 miles away, the fallout may not reach you until half a day or even more, okay? And that's why you should always consider proximity to nuclear war targets as part of your relocation, okay? If you're moving somewhere, your primary residence is most likely where you're going to be when SHTF happens, okay? So by living in an area that's far away from a nuclear war target, that's going to put you way ahead. So that's why it's critical to know where's the nearest target, okay? It's critical, all right? You need to know, are you going to be within the blast radius? Is it a surface burst? Is it an air burst, okay? How quickly is the fallout going to start to land, okay? Because if we use the North Dakota example, let's say we decide to shelter in place while that warhead detonates, okay? Let's say we have a really solid basement or something. Let's say we built a blast shelter, in our backyard. We have an Atlas shelter or something, and the warheads detonate, you're in that shelter, and then you realize, oh crap, I got to get out of here because my mother is 100 miles away and I got to go to her, and she's by herself. And I can't just stay here and abandon her. She's going to die from radiation, So in that situation, you have to think about how quickly is the fallout going to start to land if you're going 100 miles away, all right? You're going to have to basically leave immediately. If you're, let's say, just 10 miles away from that silo, you're going to have maybe 30 minutes to get out of your area before the fallout starts to land. And the first couple of hours, when that fallout lands, it's going to be lethal within 30 minutes to an hour if you're caught outside. So that's why bugging out presents a lot of risk, okay? Because you don't want to bug out and get caught out in the fallout, okay? And if you have no plan and you just, I'm going to get in my car and drive away, that's the stupidest thing you can do, because you're going to get stuck with no shelter. You're going to be in an unfamiliar area. You're going to have no supplies. So that's why your best bet is to bug in and find a shelter, okay? You should already know where there's any suitable shelters in your area, okay? If you're near a nuclear war target, you need to think about a blast shelter and a fallout shelter. If you're outside of the blast radius, then you only need to worry about a fallout shelter. Okay, so that's my recommendation, is you generally should not bug out during a nuclear war, because your chances of survival are actually going to be worse, even if you're near a target. Okay, you're much better off finding shelter than trying to bug out, because the risk is that you could get stuck out there with no shelter and no supplies, and that fallout starts to land, and you're going to have lethal radiation levels very quickly. Okay, so there's a lot of gray area, though. You need to look at how close you are to these targets. You need to look at the fallout contours. You need to look at the wind, what type of target. That's going to make a huge difference in your planning, okay? Because if you're further away from this target, then the fallout is not going to reach you for maybe a few hours. Like if you're 50 miles, 100 miles away, you have a good couple of hours to bug out before that fallout starts to land. But still, a couple of hours, it may sound like a lot of time, but you just never know what kind of obstacles are going to be in your way, okay? You just don't know. There could be, marauders out there. There could be desperate people that try to steal your vehicle because they want to get out and their vehicle broke down, or there was an EMP. And that's another thing you need to think about, is an EMP. Okay, if you try to bug out after the warheads detonate, there's a good chance that the EMPs from all the warheads detonating across the country would knock out most vehicles, okay? And most likely also, if anybody actually attacks us here in the US with nuclear weapons, they would also likely use EMP weapons at the same time to have maximum effect on our satellites and on our comms. Okay, so they would likely hit us with an EMP and also nuclear weapons as well. So the chances of using your vehicle are low, unless you have an older vehicle with a carburetor, okay? So these are all things to think about, but generally speaking, you should not bug out during a nuclear war. It's more risky, and just remember my examples. If you're out on the open road, it's probably a better idea, but you just need to have some kind of a plan where you're going so you don't get stuck out in the open. So that's pretty much it, guys. If you want to see more of my nuclear war survival content, check out my nuclear war survival playlist. I'll leave a link in the top right corner. Take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps: prepare, practice, and persevere.